Today on Geared, we create a pattern using parametric design. Sounds boring. Today on Geared, we reinvent the wheel. Yeah, kinda. Today on Geared, we're going to continue to design something we could have bought for 25 bucks on Facebook Marketplace. Yeah. Good stuff. All right, welcome back. Today we're going to continue working on our Mini ITX case. We're going to focus specifically today on the front panel. We're going to create a mesh. We're going to do that using some parametric design. And by that, we're going to use some parameters to create the different sizes of the components, like the wall thickness and the spacing and that sort of thing. So let's jump into Fusion. This is what we're going to start with. This is the front of the ITX case as we have it so far. What we're going to try to end up with today is this. I'm going to turn this back part into some mesh. So we're going to do that from the beginning. So let's create first we're going to copy the front panel here. Come over to a new project, right click and say paste new. It's going to bring that in as a new component. We're going to capture that position, say OK, and we are going to save it as Mini ITX mesh. Save. All right. So what we want to do is replace this whole section here with some mesh. So we're going to highlight that face, just hit delete. We're going to get rid of it. Before we start creating the mesh that's going to go in there, we need to create some parameters. So we're going to go to modify, change parameters. We're going to start adding some. The first parameter we're going to make is going to be nozzle diameter. And typical, and you may be asking why we're going to do a nozzle diameter in here as a parameter. Well, this is going to be 3D printed, and our line width in a 3D printer is based off of nozzle diameter. Typical nozzle diameter on a 3D printer is 0.4 millimeters. So we are going to make that our first parameter. The reason we're going to make that a parameter is because we want to be able to adjust this for printers with different size nozzles. So we're going to hit OK to that. Do another one, and we are going to do extrusion width. And this one is going to be nozzle diameter. You can start typing that, and it'll pop up with available parameters here. So you can use parameters within parameters. And that's going to be nozzle diameter times 1.2, so 120%. Line width that I use when I 3D print is 0.48 millimeters, which is 120% of the nozzle width. Some folks will have their extrusion width set statically to something 4.5 or whatever they choose. I usually do it this way because it does allow for some variability. The next parameter we're going to use is going to be mesh wall. And this is going to be the thickness of the wall of the mesh. This one is going to be extrusion width times 3. And the reason we're doing this is to make it easier for the slicer and the printer to print out the lines of the extrusion, or excuse me, of the mesh width without having to compress or change the width, dynamically try to change the width of that extrusion. It also keeps it from creating gaps inside that extrusion. So this will make a nice, solid 3 lines of extrusion for those walls. And we can also come back and make it add extrusions in there if we want to make it thicker. The next one is going to be mesh hole. And that's just going to be the size of the hole, the inside between the walls, size of that gap. So we're going to make that 6 millimeters because I think that's going to look fine. And the very last one we need is going to be spacing. Spacing is what's going to come into play when we actually make the pattern of the shapes we want to put in the mesh. And that is going to be mesh hole plus mesh wall. And that will make more sense when we go to start patterning this out. So we're going to say okay to that. Now we have all the parameters we need to create this mesh. Go ahead and hit OK. We're going to select our component. That way we keep our sketches all nice and pretty in the right place. Right click. We're going to start from the back because that's where we're going to extrude from. It's a nice flat surface. So we're going to create sketch. Okay, so here in this sketch, the first thing we're going to do is create polygon right in the middle. Doesn't matter what size. We are going to make this side parallel to this side to help constrain it. Then we're going to hit D for dimension. Grab the two outsides, and that is going to be our mesh hole. That's going to be the opening, which is 6 millimeters. We are then going to double click on that to select all the sides, hit O for offset. This is going to be our mesh wall. That's how thick it's going to be. Okay to that. We then need to create 2 lines for our mesh direction, one going out this way, and another one coming up this way. And these will be perpendicular to the sides. This will give us the direction for our mesh. Click it, hit X for construction line, do the same down here, and then, oops, Fusion had to catch up there. And then just to be safe, we are going to put some perpendicular constraints on these. Looks like it was already constrained. That's fine. So then we're going to hit E for extrude, select that. Since we're looking at it from the back, we're going to extrude up. We're going to say -2. That's going to be about how thick we want the mesh. We could have put a parameter in for that, but this is not something I'm going to come back and change. You always could. Or we could just find it in the timeline and change the extrusion. Hit OK to that. All right, so now we have the first part of our mesh that we're going to make a pattern out of. I like to do it this way because it's a little bit more visual. Patterning a body. You also get the benefit of having that pattern down in the timeline. Whereas if you do it in a sketch, you don't have that. You don't have the ability to go back and change the actual pattern without re-editing the sketch, which can be more difficult. So let's make a pattern. First thing we need to do is turn that sketch back on so we can grab these direction lines. Create pattern, rectangular pattern. We want to pattern the bodies, that's the type. The objects is that guy right there. We want to use spacing, not extent. We want to set these to symmetric. Then we're going to pick our directions, which is this guy and that guy. We can start by pulling these out. Our distance is going to be spacing. You'll notice that lines up perfectly. We're going to do the same on the other direction. Now we've got them overlapping, but we need to make a lot more of them. So the quantity, we are going to guess at 15. Nope, not even close. So we're using odd numbers because there's one in the middle and it works out from there. So let's say 25. That looks better. quantity go in the other direction, 13. Oh yeah, that looks good. In fact, we don't even need that many. We don't need those top two rows. So we can say 11. Top and bottom row, I should say. Okay, so what we're going to do is do a little cleanup here ahead of time. We can come in and unselect or uncheck some of these faces we don't want. Sometimes Fusion can take a minute because this is it's working with so many bodies it's going to create. We'll come down to the other corner, do the same thing. Now we could go through a whole bunch of work and uncheck all the ones we don't want. I'm not going to do that. I just wanted to show you that you can. What we're actually going to do is create one big body out of all of these and then split it into pieces. So we're going to hit OK to this. It's going to create a whole bunch of bodies over here. So we are going to turn off that sketch. We don't need it anymore. Collapse that. And then we're going to expand out bodies. And we have a lot. To make it easier on ourselves, we're going to rename this first body to face. And then we are going to highlight the first one of the actual mesh bodies, scroll all the way down through these 270 bodies. Shift, select the last one, and hit the combine button. Hit OK to that. And we are now down to just 2 bodies. So let's go ahead and hit save here because that's always a good thing to do. Now what we need to do is use the split body to cut away everything but except for the mesh that we want to leave in this area right here. So let's hit the split body tool. Body to split is the mesh. Splitting tool is the face body. We'll hit OK. That is going to leave us with just the part in the middle that we want. So then we can click on that so we know it's this guy here. We're going to name that mesh. And the other ones that just say body, we're going to highlight them all using the control key. Right click and say remove. Now we don't want to hit delete because that will affect any of the geometry downstream of the in the timeline of where it was created. If we hit remove, it pulls it out and doesn't affect the timeline previously. So we're getting close. We have got what we want our mesh to look like here. The last thing we would need to do is combine the 2 bodies. But I'm not going to do that. And the reason is I want to show you how it looks when you make some changes to the parameters. And I have found that once these bodies are combined, that doesn't necessarily work as well. So, and in fact, in some cases, we may even have to back up the timeline depending on what parameters we change. So let's go ahead and make some changes and see what happens. So we're going to bring up our parameters. And the first thing you might want to change is the width. And so you may say, hey, you know, just 3 passes on the printer isn't quite big enough. I want to change this to 4. That changes your mesh wall. So we'll let that calculate. And you can see that we now have fatter walls on that mesh. So let's go make some other changes here. Let's put this back down to 3. Tap down and let Fusion think for a second. Okay, now let's change the spacing inside the mesh hole. Let's change that to 8. See what that looks like. And that gave us one of the errors I was talking about. So if we hit OK, we can move our timeline back and see what it had a problem with. Hopefully. So apparently once that got cut, it didn't like that size. So let's go back to where we were. We'll fix our parameter. And there we go. So this is one thing you got to watch out with parameters. I mean, they are fantastic for being able to keep your design parametric, but sometimes they don't quite work out the way you want them to. But the good thing was we could see down here at the bottom where the errors were happening, and most of those errors were happening because we were trying to change the space on something that we had cut up. So in most cases, what we could do is roll back our timeline to here, make our changes to the parameters we want to get this dialed in, and then we probably would have to just redo our split body. But as it sits, I actually like how this looks. So I am going to combine this body with this body. Hit OK. And just to make it look good, we're going to hit A for appearance. Search for black. Let's find some plastic matte black. Change it to face. Just want to do this one front face. Sometimes you have to zoom in a little bit to make it work. There we go. And there is the mesh on the front of our Mini ITX case. So hopefully that was helpful for you. There was a lot of little quirks. Can be a lot of little quirks when you're dealing with parameters. Getting things to line up are kind of a trick. That's why you have to create that multiple levels of parameters. I will go ahead and bring up my parameters here in case you want to take a screenshot of them to see how I did this particular mesh. You could do the same thing using squares or rectangles. You would just have to change the direction of the mesh. Instead of having it at the 60-degree angle, which is what a hexagon is, you would have to just do it at 90-degree angles. But go ahead and take a screenshot of that. And with that, the next video should be another live stream for part 5, where we're going to start working on the rest of the cage again and hopefully get some stuff mounted. But this one was a bit more technical, so I wanted to do an actual recorded video. Thanks for joining me. Let me know how I did and what you thought of the video, and if you have any comments, or if you have better ways to do this, please let me know down in the description on how you would do it. And like and subscribe. Thank you so much.